I actually think before we hit that, you're going to run into energy constraints.
A voltage step-down transformer shortage probably in about a year, and then just electricity shortages in general in about 2 years. I gave a speech for the sort of world gathering of utility companies, electricity companies. And I said, look, you really need to prepare for a tripling of electricity demand.
Do you know exactly why AI has an energy bottleneck? I don't, and that's because I spend all my days staring at the shiny new thing in AI. But I decided that I don't like that. I don't want to have shallow knowledge. I want the opposite. So I'm going to learn this topic really well and explain to you exactly how AI is going to be powered in the next 10 years, backed by data. It's very possible that even with the best data and the best reasoning, our predictions are way off, and the future is way different, but we're not going to let that stop us from trying. So let's answer the first question. In this video, we will explore both the energy and the internet infrastructures. The demand for AI is so high that if there is an energy bottleneck, what would end up happening is AI would be priced at a higher point, which would mean only the wealthy and the powerful can access it, and this would widen the wealth gap, possibly stifling innovation. So why will energy be a bottleneck? To answer this, we have to understand three things. Companies love AI. All companies love time-saving technology, and AI saves time in several important ways. The first reason is that AI services improve existing workers' speed and quality quite a bit. For example, it makes coders 26 to 73% faster. A Harvard Business School report found that consultants with GPT-4 are 25% faster and 40% better at their task. The National Bureau of Economic Research found that call center agents handled 14% more cases with AI than without it. Then there's automation in general, which is another profitable avenue. Companies are full of routine, simple tasks. The ability to run these processes continuously without human oversight is highly valuable to business. However, this trend likely means significant job losses, which is concerning. Still, when given the option, companies typically choose the more cost-effective option. And the final reason is innovation and unlocking new possibilities. There are tons of startups suddenly now tackling problems that we didn't before. One of them is this German company that's trying to use AI to make buildings more energy efficient. Another option is this company finding proteins that don't even exist in nature. A possible life-saving medicine? Possibly. Overall, there are lots of reasons to want AI, and only cloud can provide. The two main motivations for companies using AI are wanting to cut costs or needing to remain competitive. And there's a lot of demand for AI on the horizon. However, most companies lack the resources to run their own frontier models. Companies are used to plugging into the cloud, and the cloud providers are already specialized at providing compute services at low latency. So I think it's a natural fit. Reason AI data centers need so much energy. The data science and IT industry is big, and there's tons of people building machine learning and AI models at tons of different scales. And this demand will continue to go up. One of the things that a lot of news coverage focuses on is the training of AI and how much it costs. I've heard news coverage citing amounts from 63 million to 78 million to even over 100 million for GPT-4. And apparently Gemini Ultra cost 190 million to train. It took 25,000 A100 GPUs over 90 days to train GPT-4. When I did a rough estimation of how much a data center would charge for training GPT-4, about 42% of the total cost was for energy, which is about $33 million of energy consumed if we had spent 78 million. Dario Amodei is quoted saying, "Every 2 years, we'll probably see an order of magnitude increase in the cost of training frontier models. So now they're costing 100 million. In 2 years, it'll probably cost $1 billion, and then 10 billion, and so on. In all likelihood, both model scale and training time will go up. As for inference, or using the model that's already trained, I think as more and more people use AI services, the inference portion will probably balloon like crazy. I'm not even sure there's mass adoption yet. They say only 20% of Americans use ChatGPT. So now let's talk about the physics of energy. How much energy is needed? But before we do that, a quick primer on energy units. When people talk about electricity at the household or appliance scale, they use kilowatt hours. For some perspective, a small house uses about 100 kilowatt hours a month, while a large home with AC will use about 500. And an average annual consumption of a US household is about 10,000 kilowatt hours. Now, at a utility scale or power plant scale, increasing by 1,000, we use megawatt hours. So medium-sized data center uses about 20 megawatt hours or 20,000 kilowatt hours every day. For comparison, that would power about 60 average homes for a month. Under ideal conditions, an average solar farm of a 2 to 3 megawatt capacity will produce about 400 megawatt hours, while a gas power plant will produce about 1,000 megawatt hours. Now, at the regional level, people use the gigawatt hours. 1 gigawatt hour is enough energy to power 3,000 average US households for a month. 2 is the daily electricity needed to provide for 200,000 residents of a city. And 16 gigawatt hours is how much a large data center would use in a month. Now, at the highest level, we use terawatt hours. The Hoover Dam generates 2 terawatt hours every year. The city of San Francisco uses about 5 terawatt hours every year, and the world uses about 176,000 terawatt hours of energy. Note that electricity is about 30,000 of the 176,000. The remainder is transportation, agriculture, industrial processes, and heating. This is a good time to mention that electricity production is a subset of energy production, and they're different things. So at the core of AI is massive parallelization. The reason it can process so much text so quickly is because it is putting a bunch of GPUs in parallel, and GPUs are already optimized for parallel computation. Exactly how much? Well, GPT-4 strings 128 GPUs together for inference. And inside each of these GPUs is billions of transistors that are all designed to process information in parallel. And it takes energy to push these electrons around. Exactly how much energy? It takes about 150 watts to run a CPU. And a top-end GPU can use about 900 watts or 6 times more energy. And they're saying a dedicated AI data center would use 4 to 5 times more energy than a regular data center. And there are about 8,000 to 11,000 data centers in the world, of which about 3,000 are in the US, and about half of all US data centers are in Northern Virginia in an area called Data Center Alley. I found this map with almost 8,000 of them, and they say data centers use about 1 to 2% of the global electricity production. So how many of these AI data centers do we need? We're probably not going to need another 8,000, probably way less. But given that one AI data center will use 5 times more energy, you wouldn't really need that many to rack up the cost. There are some projections on this. They're saying they might need about 1 to 2 terawatt hours of additional power by 2030. To put that in perspective, that's 500 to 1,000 Hoover Dams worth of energy produced in a year. So what are some reasons we can't meet the energy demand? Let's talk about all the reasons why we can't do it. If you've ever run a GPU overnight, you know intimately how quickly it can heat up even a decent-sized room. So these things need to be cooled so that they don't melt, because they can get hot. In fact, cooling will mean it has a longer shelf life and operates more smoothly. And liquid cooling is the most efficient. It removes heat faster, uses less space, so GPUs can be packed more tightly. In other words, it's more space efficient. So data centers will want to use water to do this. It is estimated that about 30 to 55% of a data center's energy consumption goes to cooling and ventilation. If data centers use a lot of water, AI data centers are expected to use up to 30% more water. Globally, at least, water is becoming a scarce resource. Recently, Google's bid to build a data center was shut down by Chile's government after they found out that it'll use 168 liters of water per second. Globally, by 2027, AI is expected to use about as much water as Denmark in a year, which has a population of 6 million people. So in general, I could see this being not a complete stopper, but at least limit the number of places it can build these things. Grid stress. Sometimes cities and municipalities like Singapore or Ireland will put a moratorium on data centers because they know that electricity grid literally can't handle the stress and possibly would cause blackouts. So that also limits the number of places data centers can be built. And remember that these are not just data centers, they're AI data centers, which means they'll be extremely power hungry. Historically, it can take 1 to 2 years for a project to get approved, and sometimes even longer for controversial projects. And in this case, AI data centers definitely qualify as drama data centers. So politics and public opinion alone might take a while to get over. Construction projects take much longer than expected. These are all the time ranges that these things can be built over. Power plants. Natural gas plants, 2 to 3 years. Solar farms, 1 to 2 years. Wind farms, 2 to 3 years. Coal-fired plants, 4 to 5 years. Nuclear plants, 5 to 10, or sometimes even more. Power lines, distribution lines, which are the lower voltage ones, 6 months to 2 years. Transmission lines, which are the high voltage ones, 3 to 7 years. Data centers themselves can be built in 1 to 2 years. But as a lot of angry career mechanical engineers will tell you, things take time in the real world. Sometimes there's big mistakes and big speed bumps. This one isn't a deal breaker, but will definitely slow things a bit. So what are some proposed solutions? In 1999, Mark Mills predicted that within a decade, half the electricity grid would have to be used to power the internet. He made the prediction based on calculations of data centers and computing at that time. However, internet traffic did 500x, but the energy consumption remained flat. So data centers are generally considered an energy success story. They were able to do this because of thousands of optimizations and innovations. The same energy success story could happen to AI, but regular data centers and most of the internet relies on CPU processing. And we established that CPUs use 6 times less energy than GPUs. So what are some proposed solutions? Nuclear. A third of US nuclear power plants are already in talks with tech firms to meet AI energy demand. But existing nuclear power plants aren't the only things billionaires are setting their sights on. Investors are all rushing into nuclear energy startups. But these companies are having trouble getting approval from the government because nuclear is a highly regulated industry. Environmentally speaking, nuclear power plants are desirable because they're carbon-free. But the most desirable feature is that they provide a really reliable and steady power output that AI data centers would require. But the caveat is that it would take away from the grid, essentially leaving everything else that needs energy at risk. A term I kept hearing about in nuclear space was SMR, which stands for Small Modular Reactor. It's a new type of reactor design that's smaller and needs to be refueled less often. But therein lies its major problem, at least for the US nuclear regulator. In early 2022, they denied this reactor's license application because this small modular reactor would have to use a uranium fuel enriched to 19%, which the current nuclear power plants use a 5% enriched uranium. And this 19% is concerning because it's a lot closer to the level of enrichment needed to make a bomb. So a bad actor would need less time and be less detectable to produce a weapon. This could possibly convince other nations to follow suit, and now everybody is convinced that you need highly fissile material to fuel SMRs, which then power AI. And this would accelerate nuclear proliferation. So while it might seem like a harmless and in fact environmentally friendly energy source, it may have huge geopolitical implications. Co-location. However, if this nuclear technology does get past a regulation, then they could build these plants right next to the data centers. This would help save on transmission costs, get past a lot of the regulation and pushback that cloud providers might get from cities and utilities. In fact, it would completely remove or minimize at least 3 of the problem areas I mentioned earlier. Solar plus battery. Something good has been happening in the background all this time, and that's the cost of solar has just been plummeting, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper. So, technically, the data centers could have a nearby solar farm, and that could power the AI data center. The obvious problem with this is that solar and wind are intermittent, and AI needs steady power. However, that could be solved by batteries. When I looked into batteries for data centers, it just seemed like a good idea, since it could help the data center remain operational, even if the grid is compromised. In fact, you could start backing up data and shutting down processes properly without loss of data, and generally come to a graceful shutdown. Microsoft, Apple, and Google have already implemented this at some of their data centers, so I know it can be done. So maybe we'll see mass adoption of this in the near future. The other problem that I have to mention is that wind and solar have to usually be placed at really specific particular places that would yield the most energy. And AI data centers would also have to be placed at places near water or cold climates, which brings me to my next point, Arctic. Something interesting that I've seen is an alternative way to cool data centers, which is to build it in the Arctic or Alaska or northern Canada and use the cold air to cool the chips. It sounds super cool. Basically, the idea is that in cold climates, the heat generated from the server farm could be siphoned into nearby buildings to heat them. However, the problem is that heat transfer is very expensive to build and to maintain. Not to mention, there's a lot of loss in transporting heat. So doing it long distances isn't really feasible. The other issue is that the heat generated from the server is hot enough to be detrimental to the GPU operation, but not really hot enough to create steam that turns a turbine. Fusion. This is the most sci-fi option, as it doesn't exist yet. However, there's many companies striving to build this transformational technology. All I can say is I hope they get there soon, but I'm not holding my breath. Thousands of tiny innovations. One of the interesting solutions is using AI to solve AI's energy problem. Basically, using AI, we can't generate energy, but we can better utilize the energy that we do have. So basically improving efficiency. Since energy is the biggest cost for data centers, sometimes costing more than the hardware used to run them, an efficiency gain of every percentage point is millions of dollars. And it's also worth mentioning that when a smaller model will do, there's no need to use a power-hungry frontier model. In fact, there are libraries coming up that will route your request to a good enough model. If this idea gets widespread use, it could be a pretty penny in the long run. And I'm sure I missed some other cool innovations. Let me know if you think of some. Moore's Law. Each new generation of GPUs get about 50% more energy efficient. So technological solutions to the energy equation do play a significant role. However, the question that's been plaguing the computing industry in the last few years is, when will Moore's Law stop holding? As we are getting very close to the point where electrons will just jump between transistors, causing errors and limiting further miniaturization. So which one is the best one? Which one is the best solution? For the electricity market, the most fruitful path forward is probably a mixture of strategies. With that being said, natural gas will probably end up powering the majority, as it's cheap and abundant and cleaner than coal, and old nuclear about 20%, and the remainder on renewables. As for nuclear power, I don't know if it will get approved for the SMRs, small modular reactors, as a lot of people don't want to rush into it, as it's important to get the safety of nuclear power just right. If you remember, it takes about 2 to 3 years to build a gas power plant. That would be fast enough to build right by a new AI data center. and the remainder from a mixture of nuclear and renewable. And over time, we can transition to carbon-free options. And for other innovations, we'll probably end up using every tool in our arsenal to meet this crazy AI demand. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Like and subscribe. That's it. I'm leaving.